Hello everybody, my name is The Goldman, and today I want to talk about Chapter 3 of The Book of Boba Fett. Since I never made a video discussing my thoughts about the first two episodes, it's important that I provide context before I discuss Chapter 3. I really disliked the first two episodes. The flashback scenes were really boring, they did absolutely nothing to draw my attention and keep me interested. Many people argue that the humanization of the Tusken Raiders was awesome, but I couldn't care less about them. The scenes in the present were better, but there wasn't enough of them, and the series still felt like it was avoiding progressing the damn plot. To my surprise, these episodes were widely loved by most people, including my damn friends who don't care about Star Wars as much as I do. So my expectations were fairly low going into Chapter 3, but to my surprise, I really enjoyed this episode. And to further my surprise even more, people seem to really dislike this episode. I must be a fucking weirdo because I can't seem to agree with the consensus at all when it comes to the show. But anyway, so many people are missing the point about this episode and why it is so underrated. Now, is this episode great? Does it compete with the best of the Mandalorian episodes? Does this episode build on top of the Star Wars mythos? No. But this episode did do a better job of expanding the character of Boba Fett than any of the flashback scenes with the Tusken Raiders in the first two episodes. We get another shorter flashback scene in this episode. Basically, Boba goes to chat with the Pikes, and when he's done, he goes back to the Tusken Raider encampment only to find them all dead. Star Wars fans have been clamoring for darker stories, and this is as dark as Star Wars has ever gotten, but no one seems to care. Now, this scene wasn't great because it was dark. It was great because it finally established the motivations behind Boba Fett's goals. The last we saw of Boba Fett before the events of Return of the Jedi, he was just a bounty hunter with a strong reputation. He gets yeeted and then ends up with the Tusken Raiders. From the point of view of just the first two episodes, he becomes close with the Tusken Raiders and then decides to leave and try to build his own criminal empire. What bugged me the most is that I don't understand why he, on a personal level, wants to become a crime boss. He never seemed to strive for that goal beforehand, so here it's completely out of the blue. Are his motivations simply that he wants power? That is incredibly uninteresting to me, and it would have definitely been an awful direction to take the character and the series. A lot of people will argue that the second episode was much better because it fleshes out Boba Fett's personality, because he's going through all this trouble just to help the Tusken Raiders. While I agree this episode does a solid job at making Boba Fett a character that shows a lot more empathy than he did before, there's a big problem with this. Boba Fett was a bounty hunter. I could be dangerously wrong, but a bounty hunter doesn't seem like the type of job for someone filled with empathy and kindness for those who can't defend themselves. Since we don't see a reason why he has become more empathetic, it makes this transition fairly hard for me to swallow. But with Chapter 3, even though it may not have given me the answer to that specific problem I had with the series, it changes the context of Boba Fett's motivations. A lot of people speculated that the reason the show was focusing so hard on Boba's relationship with the Tusken Raiders was because at some point in the series he was going to call them in as reinforcements. I honestly pictured a Dune type story where Boba Fett would conquer Tatooine through desert power. So I was pleasantly surprised that the writers made the decision to just kill all of them off. I should be clear here, I don't hate the Tusken Raiders. It's not like I was rooting for them to die in the series, but killing them off was a strong narrative choice I fully support. Temuera Morrison also does a great job of showing the pain Boba feels by this event. It would be weird if Boba just started bursting out crying, so this subtle sadness played by Temuera was a good decision. I'll be honest, the more you guys get to know me, you would know I'd much rather have a story that has a mix of highs and lows as opposed to a story that is constantly mediocre throughout. And the origin of Boba's motivation in this series was a high for me. Moving on from the Tusken Raider storyline, the introduction to the edgy teenagers did a better job of showing what kind of leader Boba Fett could be than the previous two episodes did. All we got from Boba in the first two episodes in terms of what kind of leader he could be is the mercy he often showed people. I like this character choice, but it wasn't enough for me to understand Boba Fett better. When he approaches the teenagers and basically offers them to work for his syndicate, that was a smart decision. You could argue that it wasn't the morally right decision. These kids did steal a precious asset from someone else.
Water would be nice. me?
The reason this works is because Boba Fett isn't someone like Luke Skywalker who is always going to make what he feels is the right decision, even if there are unfortunate consequences. Boba isn't going to be a tyrannical dictator, but he is going to try and better his empire without crossing a line. And right now, I'm sorry, but 2 Gamorreans isn't enough for an army. Yeah, these kids were edgy, and it still baffles me how Black Chrysanthemum was able to just walk into the castle anyway, but Boba is building his empire with people who are at least semi-competent. These kids do have all these mechanical appendages that would make them useful in a fight if necessary. Do these kids, especially the British girl, need further development? I don't think so. The kids individually aren't interesting anyway, so let's just leave them as they are. With all the positives out of the way, let's talk about what makes this episode so weird. And it's not the choreography of the fight with Chrysantan or the awkward chase scene. For me, it was the speeder bikes specifically. What made the original Star Wars films feel so real was how George Lucas was able to perfectly create a world that was futuristic, but also run down and kinda poor. The reason Tatooine is the way it is because everyone can empathize with living in a rundown town. The buildings were dirty and filled with scummy people. What made Luke's speeder work was that even though it contains technology that 2022 Earth hasn't been able to create yet, you can also tell it's a low-class speeder within the Star Wars universe. Now, the problem with the speeder bikes from the teenagers isn't that they don't have a place in Star Wars. I could realistically see these bikes being used on Coruscant. The problem is that they clash with the tone of Tatooine. They don't have the same grit and tear that the vehicles on Tatooine should have. If these kids were rich kids that happened to be in town one day, then that would work because the speeder bikes would symbolize that these kids do not belong on Tatooine. But these kids live on Tatooine, and it's implied there isn't much, let alone any parental guidance in these kids' lives. So seeing these kids who are supposed to be poor enough to where they have to steal water drive these fancy speeder bikes contradicts their backstory. To be fair, I've heard the counter argument that these kids very well could have stolen the speeder bikes, and that would be totally in their character. But even then, these kids don't seem like responsible people, because that's what irresponsible kids are like. They aren't the type of people that would take care of their belongings. Is this whole diatribe of mine a nitpick? There's an argument for that. But when something small becomes a prominent part of the scene, it ruins the immersion of the world, and in a fantasy story like Star Wars, immersion is everything. Thank you guys so much for watching another one of my videos. Do not forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I will see you guys next time.